Good afternoon, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. I hope everybody had a good week. Welcome back. If you weren't on the Zoom call at the beginning, you just missed the conversation about Alabama basketball. That's about it. Some people.
In other words, you didn't miss anything important.
I mean, if you missed the game last night, then I still don't think you missed anything important. But anyway, I shouldn't talk. Minnesota basketball's awful this year. So, in any case, good to have y'all back. Nice to be learning together. Hope everybody's doing well. Welcome to Parashat Mishpatim. And we're going to take a look at a classic a classic teacher of Hasidut, Reb Elimelech of Lezinsk. Everybody see it up on the screen? Yes. Okay. Yeah. One of the more important teachers in Hasidic history and Hasidic thought. He was the founder of the Lezinsk Hasidic dynasty, student of Maggid of Mezrich, who, as you recall, learned directly from the Baal Shem Tov. So Reb Elimelech was instrumental in the spread of Hasidism, but was also instrumental in the development of concepts and thoughts about the Rebbe and the Tzaddik, and what this interaction looks like, and what is the role of the Rebbe supposed to be in Hasidic thought. And so much of the development and so much of what ends up being the role of the Rebbe comes largely and is attributed largely to the Noam Elimelech and Reb Elimelech of Lezinsk. So important guy to learn from and to teach from. As a short introduction to what we're going to learn today, actually, I'm going to take this down for just a minute while we're chatting. There's a couple different styles of midrash and even of commentary. If you open up commentaries on the Torah, there's a couple different methods and styles you'll see. One, in midrash, there's a style called a petichta, in which, and I think I mentioned this maybe even last week. It's hard to remember what I said anymore. It was a little bit of a midrashic game that the rabbis would play, in which they'd kind of pick a random verse from the Tanakh and try to tie it in and connect that verse with the verse that they actually wanted to be the one to interpret, and that they're actually going to drash on. And it's a little bit of a way of trying, how can you weave any two verses together to make your point? In a somewhat related way, if you open up commentaries on the Torah, there are some commentaries like the Orach Chaim or Ramban, also known as Nachmanides, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, who, what they will do is they will kind of mention a verse in the Torah, and then they'll go on a very long explanation about that verse. And then it might be a couple verses before they'll pick up again, and they'll kind of follow that again. They won't comment on every verse, but they'll comment kind of in chunks of verses. And to some extent, that's kind of what we see and what we've done in Hasidic thought also, is a lot of the Rebbes won't, sit there and comment on every line of a verse or every verse, but they'll do a teaching on one verse and then, might skip a chapter and then do something on the next verse and then skip a chapter and so on. The other way you can do it is what's called a serial midrash or a serial commentator. And I don't mean like breakfast cereal, though that's delicious for those who like it. But that what they'll do is they'll really comment in order. And if you read Rashi famously does this, or Ibn Ezra, or Rashbam, who is Rashi's grandson. They'll sit there and comment on like line, word by word, chunk, like verse by verse, and they'll go like short commentaries on every one of the verses. And a lot of midrashim will do the same thing. You might have like an entire chapter on one chapter of midrash on one verse of the Torah, because they're sitting there talking like piece word by word, drashing out the verse. I say all that as introduction because the latter is what Reb Noam Elimelech is going to do in today's teaching. Is he's going to take one verse from our Torah reading, and he's really going to dig in and talk about what it means chunk by chunk. So rather than breaking it up as we usually do to kind of review and then see where he's going, we're going to actually just kind of read through the whole thing, I think, today, and then we'll kind of discuss together, because it's verse word by word, chunk by chunk, it kind of all builds upon itself. So let's start with the verse, or two verses as the case may be. Questions before we start? Somebody wants to read the verses to open up.
Okay, I'll read the first one.
Please.
If a person opens a pit, or a person digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall pay damages. Silver shall be given to the owner of the animal, but the dead animal belongs to the owner of the pit.
Okay, questions, comments, thoughts? Pretty straightforward civic law, right? If you dug up a pit on your property and you don't take care of the pit, and somebody else's property falls into it, well, you are responsible because you neglected to actually take care of the pit and protect other people or property from getting damaged by it. So you have to pay back the owner, but you get the body of the dead animal. Yes, Suzanne.
Well, it's not so straightforward, because it doesn't say if the animal to begin with was the owner's or somebody else's.
Well, I mean, if it was your own animal, then you don't really have to pay yourself damages. Like it's presumably somebody else's animal walks into it. By the way, this opens up a huge amount of conversation in the Talmud. And actually this Parashat opens up a huge amount of conversation in the Talmud, in that there are 4 kinds of property damage, according to the first Mishnah in Bava Kama, all of which come from this Parashat. It's an ox, a pit, a tooth, or a foot. So these are 4 kinds of property damage. If an animal, if your property causes damage to somebody else's property, is the ox. If your property neglect, which is the pit, if your neglect causes damage to somebody else's property, what is the civil law? Tooth is if your animal destroys somebody else's property. Foot is like trampling. If your animal walks on somebody else's property and destroys the property, what is your liability? And this becomes like an opening for so much civil law. Yes, Steve.
I think this goes a little bit light on the guy who negligently dug the pit, because he does have to pay damages, but he gets to keep the dead animal. So there's presumably he didn't lose anything, because he got an animal in exchange for his silver, and yet he was negligent. There's no deterrence there. There's nothing to keep him from digging a pit again and not covering it, because he didn't suffer.
Well, yeah, and another way of looking at it too is what about cases of trespassing? This person with the ox, what business does he have on your property? It could be he brings a sick animal, falls into the pit on purpose, and then he doesn't have to. He gets paid for a sick animal. He can go out and buy a new one. I don't know. I'm just
So, so just to cover, I actually think there is some deterrent here because
Mhm.
particularly with oxen and donkey, their value is really tied into their value to be able to work.
Can't eat it.
So a dead
And you
animal,
can't
a
eat
dead
it,
ox
right.
or a dead donkey, you can't eat it because it's
Mhm.
treif. It died on
Right.
its own. So
Yep.
you can't even use it for meat. You could, yes, you could like take the hides and sell the hides of the animal to recoup some of the value, but you're not going to, the value you get out of the carcass is much lower than the animal's actually worth.
Yeah, okay.
So there is some deterrent. And however, to your point, I think there is a piece of this, excuse me, in which the owner of the pit bears the bulk of the liability. You should have covered up your pit so that nobody gets hurt.
yeah.
But I think there's a piece of it too where the owner of the animal has to take some of it, the brunt too, because you didn't control your animal from falling into the pit.
Mhm.
So, you didn't keep track of your animals. It's wandering on somebody else's property. So, I mean, I think there is a piece of it in which that's why the owner of the pit doesn't take the full brunt of it, because to some extent, you should have taken some care of your animal to make sure it doesn't fall into pits. But I think this is all conversation that's going to come from the Talmud and try to argue these issues from the Talmud of what's going to happen. Reb Elimelech is not going to be all that interested in this, because what's Reb Elimelech as a Hasidic Rebbe interested in? He's interested in the spiritual aspects of this teaching. So let's dig into the spiritual aspects. If somebody wants to read, we're going to let you kind of read the rest of it if somebody wants to read for us.
I'll do it.
Go for it.
If can also mean when, as in when a righteous person who is called person takes upon him or herself the obligation of opening the pit. This is an allusion to the springs of awe and holiness that can be opened in people's hearts through awe and great holiness. Or digs a pit. Digs can mean carving. When the person begins to carve and engrave awe and holiness into people's hearts, and an ox or donkey falls into it, that is to say that the shells fall into it. The owner of the pit shall pay damages, that is to say, this is the reward for this righteous person, since the blessing one, Hashem, is the owner and master of all holiness and awe, and will pay to the righteous their reward in the world to come. Not only this, but the silver shall be given to the owner. Interpret that this also is a reward, since this awe and holiness that the righteous person has caused others to experience will be given back unto him or her as well. It will increase the awe, love, and longing to serve the blessing one. This silver can mean longing, as in you were surely longing for your father's house, which is the longing and love which shall be returned to the owner. In this way, I have interpreted the rabbinic saying, words that come from the heart enter the heart. The interpretation is that the heart itself, which the words come from, in truth, those words return and enter back into the same heart and increase the holiness in it.
Y'all followed all that?
It's pretty deep.
Great. So before we dig in, what's he actually saying?
And I'm going to be truthful. I have no clue.
Great, that's fine.
So help me out, Rabbi.
We'll
I don't know.
We'll walk through it. But can anybody try to summarize what he's trying to say?
Well, I mean, basically, he took that whole pit that we were thinking literally about and made it into a spiritual thing where the pit is like the spiritual aspect of opening up your heart and opening up your heart and the damages that are paid are the rewards that you will get from opening up your heart to the awe and something
Okay.
along those lines.
Somebody else want to take a stab?
Is it that if you open your heart to God or even to others and allow other people to enter in and you experience that with them, that you will be rewarded for that in spreading spirituality?
You're pretty. I think that's the general gist of where he's going. But let's see how. Let's walk through how he gets there. So, if the word key is very interesting, it has about 4 or 5 different meanings in the Torah. A professor that I worked with in undergraduate work, I think, wrote an entire article on the use of the word key in the Torah. It's like a 30-page article on like this 2-letter word and all the different uses it has and what it means in different contexts and whatnot. It can mean, in some contexts, it means if, which is probably what it actually means in the Torah, is if you do this, then this is what happens. It can also mean because. It can also mean like, this is what happens, key, because this is what's going to happen afterwards. It can, however, as Reb Elimelech points out, it can also mean when. Like when this happens, this is what you're going to do. So he connects it when a person, namely a tzaddik, and tzaddik in Hasidic thought is usually a code word for the rebbe, for the leader, particularly with the Noam Elimelech. Takes upon himself the obligation of opening a pit. This is an allusion to the springs of awe and holiness that can be opened in people's hearts through awe and great holiness. What does that mean? What's the Rebbe doing?
I remember when we talked about awe, we were talking about like awe of God. So is he opening himself up to the awe and wonder of God? More to like, I guess, to connect to God. So he opens his heart up.
He's praying.
What does the word rabbi mean?
Teacher. Sure.
Means my teacher. Rav
Mm.
means like teacher, rabbi means like my teacher. So what's a rabbi's number one job?
And teach.
To teach you.
So it's not just he's opening himself up. It's not just he's opening his own sense of awe and wonder and holiness in himself.
Mm.
You know, he's opening
But
up
he's
a space
opening
of
it up for
exploration.
other people.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's helping when a tzaddik opens up the pit of the heart, opens up the wells of awe and holiness in somebody else, so that they can also connect with God.
Mm.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, for me, it's like on one level, he opens a space of, exploration and learning and, going deeper. Really kind of good.
Yes. And so this pit that you're opening up in the Torah is not a pit. You're causing other people's hearts to open up to the possibility of God, of spirituality, of Judaism, of awe, of holiness, what this can be and what it can be in your life.
How does the idea of damages play into this metaphorically now?
We'll get there because he has a thing on damages. It's a little roundabout, but it's kind of a clever little drash there. Or he digs a pit. Okay, so he said digs can mean carving. In some sense, what are you doing when you dig?
You're making a mark in the earth.
Right. You're
Yeah.
kind of like you're carving or engraving.
Mhm.
You're like carving, engraving the earth. So in some sense, what are you doing as a teacher? You're trying to carve and instill the sense of awe and holiness in your students.
I get that.
I get that, but I have a question, Rabbi. So every time that we like study these parshas and we get the drash on them, they make my head spin. So I guess my question is like, how do you get past? I mean, is this what we have to do, what we're doing now, to get to like the deeper spiritual parts of the Torah? Because I mean, I would never have thought that this pit, when they talk about the laws, I'm just thinking they're talking about the laws. I don't see it, you know what I mean? I don't see anything else. So how do you?
I guess what let me try to understand your question a little more. Is your question, as a rabbi, how do you come up with these?
Because my head is buzzing right now. I can't even think straight, but go ahead.
Is part of it like how
Yes,
do you,
I mean
is part of it like how does Reb Elimelech come to this point? Is that the question?
that's one of the questions. That's one. Because like, how do they know this? And then the second part is like, how are we supposed to know this when we just read the Torah on our own? Like, how do we get to that?
So, excellent questions. The second one is probably the easier question.
Mm-hmm.
How are you supposed to get to it? I don't think you're expected to get to it on your own. That's why you have teachers. But so much of Midrash, Hasidic thought, even Kabbalah, so much of it is predicated on this idea that what the Torah says is just a hint of what it's actually saying, but that through the lens of the interpretations, through the lens of a Midrash, through the lens of the commentaries, through the lens of Kabbalah or Hasidut or whatever, then you can understand what it's really saying deeper. So it's not really, you're supposed to just like, you're not supposed to just read this text and automatically jump to what the Rebbe Elimelech is saying. But now when you read it on Shabbat, you can be like, there's something deeper here. So a lot of it is, once you learn the Midrash, once you learn some of these, then when you come back to the Torah reading, you understand some of the allusions that are going on. So, you read the Torah through the lens of the Midrashic interpretation.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that means that basically, in order to get a truer understanding, we need to, I guess that's why people are in yeshiva all the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sort of, yes. But there are people who will, instead of, sitting there with the Chumash, will either read the commentary in the Chumash, or will bring there's a book called a Mikro Gedolot, which sits there and has all the commentaries in it, and you'll sit there and read through the commentaries. People do that. Okay. Or you do that during the week leading up to Shabbat, so that way what, when you get to Shabbat, you can focus and be like, but if Rashi says this, and
right.
But Rashbam disagrees and says this, but Ramban says this, and Orach Chaim says this, and the Kli Yakar makes this argument, and because you spent all week reading up to it, you can.
So that means Jonathan, we gotta up our game when we read Torah.
Well, yeah, but I appreciate my rabbi. I appreciate being learning this, because I mean, I guess I sort of knew it all along, but there's always going to be as above also as it is below. I mean, the literal meaning of the text is connected to a spiritual subtext that is, full of possibilities for exploration, and there's really no right answer to it. There's no one way, as we know, to interpret it. So it's in the exploring and the asking the questions where you get to go deeper and dig deeper. Yeah. So I really appreciate this moment of kind of learning something new about it. Well,
and what I'll also say is all of it is Torah. So in some sense, if you're not the spiritual type, but you really are interested in what the shot of the Torah really is saying and what is really going on the surface, and that's really what you're focused on, but you want some more commentary on it, Rashbam is fantastic at. That's what Rashbam does. Rashbam sits there and explores what's going on like the surface level. If you're like a English major and you really like grammar and you really want to know like how the grammar is working, Rabbi Avraham Ibn Ezra does like his commentary is very grammar focused, and he tries to derive meaning out of the grammar of the Torah. If you like Midrash, Rashi's your guy. Rashi basically goes through and cites Midrash, like all the Midrashim on the Torah. Not all of them, but he cites that's a lot of what he does is based on earlier Midrashim. If you want something more spiritual, Ramban is a mystic. He'll give you that commentary. So like what I'm saying is like there's really not a wrong way to do it. You just have to find the path that speaks most to you. For me, that's Hasidut, which is why I teach this class, because it's fun for me and I enjoy it. But if you're not a Hasidic, if you're not into Hasidut, that's okay. You don't have to be. If Hasidut's not deep enough for you and you want the spirituality and you want to go read the Zohar, knock yourself out. I mean, there's a path for that too. Some of it is you need to explore some of what the different options are so that you can find the right path for you and what speaks to you.
Rabbi, it's Shirley. I want to cut in here. I get the carving. I get what the rebbes saying about opening the pit in your heart and this kind of thing. But what's really throwing me off with this is how it's the statement, and an ox or a donkey falls into it. Okay. That is to say that the shells, the kilopot, fall into it. Now, I'm like, that really throws me off. Because,
okay, so we hadn't really gone to that part yet. So let's jump into it now since you bring it up.
Okay.
What's throwing you off? Let's start there.
Okay, kilopot is like the shell, okay? So you have this donkey falling into a carved heart where the Rebbe has dug into the person's heart to increase holiness and to teach. And then all of a sudden you have these shells. And kilopot really is the shells that hide the inside of the outside of the holiness. So that's what's confusing me. He goes from saying he's opening this person's heart and he's doing this and he's bringing his teaching, and then all of a sudden the shells, the wicked shells, fall in. So I don't get that part.
Okay. So we've used this example before. That's my nut, right?
Okay.
But this nut's been shelled. This is an almond. You don't care about the shell. When you're eating a nut, you don't want to eat the shell. The shell's not really edible. And it hurts your teeth. It's hard. That's the point of the shell. What you want to do is you want to crack through the shell to get into the nut that's underneath it, that's inside. The shell is called a klipa. It's or klipot if it's multiple shells. Now, how do you crack through the shell? Well, one, according to Kabbalah, the first step, you have to know there's a shell. If you don't know there's a shell, you're not going to be able to crack through it, which means you need to understand that there's a spiritual layer underneath the physical layer. Some people can't get past that part. I think I've said this before. I find The Matrix, the movie The Matrix, to be a really handy way to understand Kabbalah. When I was a freshman in college, I had already seen The Matrix, loved it. It was my favorite movie. And we had somebody at Hillel who wanted to do a showing of Matrix and talk about how Matrix compared with Jewish mysticism. I'm like, ooh, that sounds fun. So I went to the event. We got there. He's like, well, turns out The Matrix has nothing to do with Jewish mysticism. So we're just going to watch the movie and have pizza. I'm like, okay, cool. So we watched the movie, great time. Then I learned about Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, and I'm like, actually, The Matrix has a lot to do with Kabbalah if you just learn into it. So what's part of the idea of The Matrix is that the world we live in is a computer-generated program that makes us think that we're living in the real world, but the real world is completely different and is something else. But to able to live in what is the real world, you have to understand that the world we're in is a computer-generated program. Same kind of idea in Kabbalah. We live in a physical world full of shells. This physical world is a shell. But if you want to get to the spiritual world, if you want to understand, if you want to have all the spirituality, you need to understand and know that this is a world full of shells and this is a world full of klipot. And then you can try to get into the actual spiritual world that's underneath it. Now, how does that relate to donkeys and oxen?
Yes, that's my question.
Yes.
I get.
I need to lay the foundation before I can build the structure.
Okay.
I think, so what's going on here is you are carving pits, carving wells into people's hearts to open them up. And as you open them up and they recognize the physical nature of this world and the spiritual world that's underneath, then the klipot start to fall away.
Okay.
The klipot, and as you're cracking through the klipot, they're kind of gone. It is to use the same parallel, though it doesn't, is that, just as a donkey or ox falls into the pit and dies, so the klipot fall into the pit of holiness and are nullified.
So the klipot, like, there's carving going on. Are those the wood shavings from the carving?
No, klipot are kind of in.
It's not the shell of the bark of a tree or something like that. No.
Not, I mean, it's a similar analogy, yes. Like underneath the bark is the tree.
Yeah.
And the bark is kind of the outer layer, but the klipot are not like the tree itself. It's physical. The physical world is itself has klipot that
hide the spiritual inside.
Shelter the spiritual world that underlies it.
Good explanation, Rabbi. Thank you so much. That makes sense.
Other questions? It's interesting he doesn't go into much comment on this. It's kind of like he just kind of mentions it and keeps going.
Good explanation.
Other questions, comments?
No, but now that you've explained it that way, now I'm understanding the rest of it. Now it's starting to make sense.
Okay, so the owner of the pit shall pay damages. First of all, the word damages does not actually appear in the Torah. If you look at the Hebrew, it's Baal Habur Yishalem, which is the owner of the pit shall pay.
Mm-hmm.
Damages is just kind of implied. Maybe next time I teach this text, I'll take out the word or I'll put it in brackets or something. But it's not actually in the text. So it's the owner of the pit shall pay. That is to say, you will be paid, you will be rewarded by the owner of all. Because God, Hashem, God, is the owner and master of all. So therefore, God will pay you for opening up the pit. Which, by the way, is a complete inversion of what is actually happening in the Torah text. But it still fits, because ultimately you're opening the pit, but God is the owner of the pit because God is the source of all the holiness in the first place. Logically, I'm not sure it follows entirely well, but spiritually, you kind of get where he's going with it.
Mm-hmm.
Questions, comments?
Well, I think all of these analogies he's using are pointing to just how hard work it is to get to the meaning of these. I mean, digging a pit is about the hardest work I can imagine, having done that before. And then you look at the ox and donkey, those are both beasts of burden. It's not like something good to eat, really. And then you get into the rabbi or who's ever helping other people to get there. He's got to put a lot of preparation and work into being able to help others reach that point. So I think you're emphasizing all the work that's required.
That's an interesting point, which he doesn't seem to go into, but I wonder if there's something underlying that as well, of the amount of effort it takes for the tzaddik to dig up the wells of awe and holiness in other people, and to get them to work through the klipot, to get to the nut that's underneath, and be able to reach this level of holiness that the Rebbe knows that they can achieve. He doesn't say it explicitly, but I wonder if there is something implicit in that also. Yes, Steve.
I think this is what you were saying, but in this paragraph, the owner of the pit, that was a tzaddik, and he's paying the damages, but this says that paying is the reward for the righteous person. So that maybe it's a little bit.
So maybe think of it this way. The Rebbe is a servant of God. So the work the Rebbe is doing is on behalf of the master, but the master really owns the pit. You know, the master owns what the work the servant does.
Okay.
So yes, the Rebbe is digging the pit, but because the Rebbe is the servant, the God is actually the master who owns the pit.
So does that mean that we are the ox or donkey that falls in the pit?
No, I think it's more, I think the ox and donkey are more the acknowledgement that the physical world is not all there is.
Okay.
And that the klipot are nullified because you're able to now access the spiritual world.
So the ox and donkey falling in the pit it just creates the opportunity, in other words.
Or is the end goal, I guess. You want the donkey and ox to fall in the pit because that
Yeah.
means that your student has achieved a level of spirituality to be able to get into the spiritual world.
So the ox and the donkey, according to this right here, it says an ox and a donkey falls into it. That is to say, the klipot fall into it. So the ox and the donkey are the klipot. They
Correct.
are the mask over the spiritual.
Correct. They are symbolic of the klipot.
Mhm.
Well, I still feel like the ox or the donkey because I fell in. I didn't expect this, and when you open this up, to the midrashic, level, it was like, wow, so I did kind of fall into a.
That's why I said we need to step.
possibility.
That's why I said we need to read more of them commentaries when we be reading Torah.
Yeah,
That's what I'm saying.
I feel like a lucky ox.
To come back to Steve's question, I think there's a point where, as the servant, you're digging up the holes so that people can have a stronger relationship with God, but God still owns those. Owns the pits, owns the hearts, but in the future will pay you your reward for opening them up.
Right. It says, and will pay to the righteous. So Hashem is paying to the tzaddik his reward in the world to come.
Correct.
Okay.
You got it. But wait, there's more. Not only this, but the verse says, the silver shall be given to the owner. Now we're going to get a little bit of wordplay. The silver shall be given to the owner. This is also a reward. And this is a great comment, and we've looked at it before, that I think it's Rabbi Hanania, if I remember correctly. Maybe it was Rabbi Nachman, says, I learned a lot from my colleagues. I learned more from my teachers, but I learned the most from my students. And that's kind of where he's going here too, is that when you open up the awe and holiness for others, it also does it for yourself. You get some payback for yourself when you do it. That helping other people come to this connection will help your spirituality as well. And how does he get there? So he has a wordplay here with kesef, which means silver, or means silver, generally kind of means money in the Torah, and even in modern Hebrew, kesef kind of just means money in general. It does also mean silver, but he says kesef can also mean longing, as in this verse from Genesis, nachsof nichsafta, which you hear sounds very similar to kesef, nichsof, kesef, similar root phrase, though it has different meaning, which is a wordplay to say that the longing, the love that you give will be returned to you as the teacher. The words that come from the heart enter the heart. That the words that you do, the teachings that you give, will come back to you, and will reinforce you to be able to increase the awe and holiness with it. So that when you're able to open up this awe and holiness in others, it'll open it up in yourself as well.
That's what the Beatles said. And in the end, the love you make is equal, the love you take is equal to the love you make.
Exactly. Which one of them wrote that? Do you know? Is that Paul, John?
Sounds like John Lennon would be.
Sounds like John too. I'm going to guess it's John.
Yeah, I don't know that Paul is actually singing that lyric at the end of Abbey Road, so I don't know. It sounds like something that John would write, not Paul, though. You're right.
But wise words nonetheless. I was trying to see if we knew who to give the credit to, but I don't offhand. But as a rebbe talking to other rebbes and in some way teaching other rebbes, he's trying to reinforce in them that, this is your job, that these verses are referring to your job as rebbes, as your job as teachers. But as you're able to do this, as you're able to succeed, as you're able to teach, it'll help you spiritually as well. It'll help you reinforce it. I read this as in a pretty positive tone. I think what he's trying to say is, when you reinforce and when you teach people, your spirituality will be enhanced as well. But as I was reviewing this teaching, I also was thinking you could read it in either direction. That the words that come from the heart enter the heart. So if your words are, if you're teaching a Torah that's not kind, if you're teaching a Torah of hatred, or if you're teaching a Torah of abuse, of that, it's going to reinforce that in your heart as well. And I don't think he says it here, but I think there's a little bit of a warning here as well as to be careful about what you're teaching and what you teach others, because whatever you're teaching is going to get reinforced in yourself as well. So make sure that you're teaching properly as well, that you're teaching holiness, you're teaching awe, you're teaching spirituality, you're teaching love and longing, and you're not teaching other things that will negatively reinforce what you teach also.
I think it also means that if you're in a relationship with one person, or you're in a group like this, and you're being vulnerable, and you're expressing words from your heart, that words from the hearts of others will come back to you as well. Yeah,
I think that's a beautiful way of saying it, and it's true in relationships. That, what's the saying? Your vibe attracts your tribe. You guys heard that?
No, that's pretty cool though. I like it.
Is that, the way you act and kind of the energy you put out is going to attract the people that are around you. So if you are vulnerable, if you are loving, if you are happy, you're going to attract happy, loving, vulnerable people to you.
Yeah.
If you're closed off, if you're angry, you're going to attract closed off and angry people to you. So put out the vibes of the tribe you want to attract, I guess.
Just continuing my musical theme, the Grateful Dead said, if you plant ice, you're going to harvest wind.
Wait,
So
say that again, Stephen.
Here's the problem, Steve, is usually I'm the one that's quoting the song lyrics, and now you're staging me here.
If you plant ice, you're going to harvest wind.
Oh, okay.
The way we did.
I'm going to have to up my lyric game with you.
Yeah, come on, man.
Well, I was singing Beast of Burden in my head when I said that.
That was the one reference that went through my head too, Eddie. Rolling Stones over Beatles any day. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Ooh, okay. Hold on.
They're not mutually exclusive. They're two sides.
Whatever. We've had this discussion before. Enough. Okay.
She doesn't like John Lennon either, by the way, and I'm a Leninist, so we argue about
that. Before we break out into a Beatles Stones fight, any other questions, comments, thoughts, reflections?
I again love every time I do this kind of stuff with you, Rabbi, and everybody. And this weekend when we read the Torah, Jonathan and I are going to sit. Now that one verse is all we have to go on. We are going to sit and entertain that and milk that for a long time and try to read more commentary as we work our way through the Torah.
I will say, in the Chumash that we have on the
Mhm.
bottom is a pretty interesting commentary that tends to follow. There's actually two commentaries. There's kind of the text at the top. There's one in the middle, which is a little more scholarly, historical, and then there's one at the bottom, which is a little more spiritual, midrashic, which occasionally cites some Hasidut, but usually sticks to midrash and biblical scholars, but is some pretty interesting content in there. So that's a good place to start.
We need to get one of those because the one we have right now is Art Scroll. So, I mean, there's commentary in it.
Art Scroll is pretty good.
Mhm.
One of the downsides of Art Scroll is they are very loyal to Rashi.
Yes,
And
we
they
get a lot of
will-
Rashi.
They will understand it strictly through Rashi, which there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. You just have to know that
Mhm.
that's what's happening and that there's other interpretations out there.
Okay.
If you're ever interested, I can give you some references of other books.
Definitely. Okay.
But,
Thank you.
the bottom commentary in the Etz Chaim Chumash is a good one to go with.
Okay.
At least, if nothing else, while you're sitting in services reading the Torah, like during
Mhm.
Torah reading, you can read that. So,
That's true. Okay.
other questions, comments, thoughts? Well, thank you all very much for coming. Always
Thank
a pleasure to learn with y'all. Stay dry and safe tonight.
Thank you.
Weather's supposed to get bad within the next hour or two. So stay dry and safe. And if I don't see you before then, Shabbat Shalom.
That's all right.
If I don't see you on Shabbat, then have a great week. And I look forward to learning with y'all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Take
Bye,
care,
everybody.
everybody. Be well.
Thank you too.